First of all, let me clarify something about populism. Totally agree on the fact that the centrality of the people is the most important thing, as also the vagueness of the message and the friend-enemy distinction. So these are more or less the features, the characteristic of populism. And we can define, as Casmude argued, that it is a sort of illiberal reaction towards an anti-democratic, technocratic liberalism. So we have also this side of the coin. I would like to draw your attention. I would like to underline, because this is very important for your question for the COVID measures. So because from one side, we can talk about state of emergency, so governance of the state of exception to a certain extent, because governments were forced to take very fast measures in order to contain the morbidity of this virus. But of course, this went to a detriment of what is the normal democratic life. So of course, they took these measures bypassing the traditionally parliamentary debates, skipping counterbalancing power measures, as well as democratic requirements and so on, because the urge was to face with this on this regard, on this crisis, or this pandemic crisis that it is, in my opinion, better to call syndemic rather than pandemic, because we have to take into consideration the healthy policy, of course, but also the social dimension. So the illness from one side, the virus, but not the illness in itself, but also this must be connected also with the social inequalities, for example. So the social dimension is very important. So, and another aspect, and I will come briefly to the point, is from one side science, and the other side the political use of science, which is pretty different. It is very, very different. So how can I say, what the governments do according to what science is saying. So it is fully democratic to criticize the political use of science to a certain extent. And this was what the populist movements, the anti-vaccines movements did. So we are in presence, talking about these no-vax movements, for example, so we are in presence of a variety of claims and aims. We cannot divide black and white. It is not so simple, because we have protests that went from a simple rejection of science. So imagine that the governments inoculated a very strange substance in order to control whatever. We have this kind of protest, which is to a certain extent irrational, but we had also protests against the reduction of the social life to biopolitics, the reduction to a simply matter of fact of biology. But whereas life is social, so they were against, for example, social distancing, or against, I'm talking about Italy, about the Green Pass, which was a measure that exceeded to a certain extent, that went beyond the containment of the virus. It was a political measures rather than an healthy measures. So this, and I will conclude. This increased once more the distance between the technocrats. Think about the overexposed biologists in TV, for example, and the people. And as Barbara Stigler argued, rightly pointed out, people was treated to a certain extent as in a paternalistic way. Barbara Stigler talked about infantilization of the people. In other words, it was the ideological side of the governance of this state of exception. So we cannot avoid this neoliberal governance for the healthy measure. It was not something neutral. It was they were measures, but with a strong neoliberal content. To conclude, the problem was to come back to what Casmud, the definition by Casmud, populism as an illiberal reaction to the anti-democratic liberalism, which is partly true. But with the COVID crisis, I think we had on a turn into a more protection of the state, because there was the big involvement of the state, and also a new form of technocratic authoritarianism versus claims of liberties. And in certain cases, a rejection of science. The problem, and this is my conclusion, is that from one side, the state protection has not been accompanied by real and substantial economic measures to protect people. So it's a protection not properly substantial way. And on the other side, the populist claims were often based on pure neoliberal liberties, the freedom to go out, to go to a restaurant, to the cinema, and so on. So they're pure neoliberal to a certain extent, without escalating the level of protest by affirming, for example, the need to widely consider social and healthy policies, to combat inequalities, for example, and to protest in order to have the necessity to establish a stronger welfare state and for having welfare measures. So the populist protest, in my opinion, was to a certain extent weak in these terms, we witnessed this kind of claims only partially. But this is it's important in order to problematize, to puzzling the concept of populism, because we cannot, in order to understand populism, we cannot reduce this only to extreme right protests or irrationalism or so on. Populism is not an ideology. Populism is a way to construct politics. So it could be left or right. It could be progressive to a certain extent or reactionary. So it is, on this regard, neutral. Anyway, the discourse would be much more complicated. I hope that we have the possibility to go more in depth during this discussion, and I really appreciate the intervention that will follow and that preceded me. Thank you very much.